It's 1958, and I'm going to look into my crystal ball to see the future of the automobile. Or I could just check out the Golden Sahara II. Hi there, Rick DeBrule here with another interesting chapter in the automotive evolution. And once again, I'm at the Martin Auto Museum, a great permanent collection of more than 170 cars that tell all kinds of interesting stories. And occasionally, we get a good loaner, and that's exactly what we have right here. This is the Golden Sahara II. It's on loan from the Claremont Collections. That's a great museum for cars in Chicago, Illinois. And this car, boy, what an interesting story. This car isn't just an amazing car to look at. This car was designed to predict the future of automotive technology. And guess what? Back in 1958, when this car was built, well, they predicted an awful lot of things that you have in your car today. So to tell the story, I actually have to go back, well, to the beginning, of course. And a guy named George Barris, you've heard of him, of course. He's one of the preeminent car customizers of our time. And some of the cars that he's built, well, you remember very well. For example, the Batmobile, the original Batmobile, that's the one that sold at Barrett-Jackson for more than $4 million. He built the Munster coach. He built the Hirohata Merc, a very famous lead sled. He even built this custom car that was used on Banachek, the TV show at AMX. Very cool car that also sold at Barrett-Jackson not long ago. Now, the story of this car, the Golden Sahara II, though, goes back to the fact that he had a 1953 Lincoln Capri. Now, it was a hardtop. He was actually towing another car and had an accident. He actually went underneath a truck and chopped off part of the top. He was sitting there with this car and he's thinking, what can I do? How can I redesign this car? And this is what he came up with. A redesign, reimagined. But of course, he had to find someone who was willing to pay the bills. A guy named Jim Street stepped up and said, you know what? I think we could do this and make a show car that we could tour with. They supposedly spent $25,000 in mid-1950s money to build the Golden Sahara I, the first edition of the Golden Sahara. And apparently it was very successful. It was so successful that Jim Street decided, you know what? I want to take it to the next level. I want a car that isn't just cool looking on the outside, but it's cool inside with all kinds of future technology. You got to remember, this was the 1950s. Everybody was looking to the future, imagining how long before we got flying cars. What would the Jetsons be driving around in? So Jim Street said, you know what? I'd like to make something that's even cooler. And here's what he did. He took the car back. Well, he took it back to Dayton, Ohio. A company called Delphos Machine and Tool, they actually put together this version, the Golden Sahara II. And it's got all kinds of technology underneath that we'll talk about in a moment. But it's also got something that you're probably noticing right off the bat, and it's these tires. They got together with Goodyear, and Goodyear was in the process of creating something called a neothene tire. It was literally a glowing tire. The idea was to make a safer tire, something that could be more easily seen by cars. You know, when you were braking or turning, the light would come on. It might be visible in bad weather. So the neothene tire was something that Goodyear thought could be the future. So they got together with Jim Street. They said, we'll put our cool tires on your amazing car and we'll tour the country talking about the future of automotive safety and technology. And that's exactly what they did very successfully. This was on the show car circuit back in the late 50s and the early 60s. Everybody wanted to see this thing. But as time goes on, well, things start to break. And while it looked really cool and futuristic in the late 50s, by the mid-60s, not quite so much. So there came a point in time when Jim Street decided, you know, got to put this car away. That's exactly what he did. And in fact, for decades, this car wasn't seen until Jim Street passed away. And it was pulled out of his collection and set up for auction. This was sold in 2018 to the Claremont Collections. And the Claremont Collections decided they wanted to see this car restored to its original spectacular beauty. They bought it for $385,000. And they sent it to a company called Chicago's Speakeasy Customs. They did the work of restoring it to its original glory. And that's exactly what you see right here, the restored version of the Golden Sahara II. To do a little walk around for this Golden Sahara II, I want to also talk about the history of custom fiberglass here in the United States. The kind of stuff that allowed George Barris and, of course, all those other great designers like Dean Jeffries and other great customizers to build amazing vehicles. Because fiberglass, while it had been in existence before World War II, in fact, there's some versions of it go back, I think, to the late 1800s, it really wasn't very practical for use because it took a lot of heat to create fiberglass in the early going. But In 1943, they came up with something called laminac. Now, laminac was a polyester resin that made it easier to use fiberglass. You could set it up without using a lot of heat. Once they created that, fiberglass became a much more workable product. There was this car in 1945. It was called the Scarab. It too was supposed to be the future of the automobile, but they made a fiberglass version of it and actually drove it across the country. After World War II, some companies began to look at it for a variety of products. And then once the customizers got a hold of it, well, they did all kinds of fun stuff. And you can see what they did right here. Now, I mentioned this came from a 1953 Lincoln Capri. Now, a Lincoln Capri has a little bit of a kind of a faux inlet, a fake inlet that comes right here. But as you can see, George Barris took that simple design that popped out right here and made something much bigger and bolder, especially when you see the tail fins on this thing and how they go out. And then, of course, it's got all these things along the side. Now, all these are literally just a little piece of metal these were actually gold-plated and then set along the side of the car. And one thing that's really interesting to see, when you look at this car, your first thought is, how do you get in? I mean, there's no door handle right here. Of course, we look inside. I can't see any door handle in there. How would you get into this car? Well, it's really simple. You just have to know exactly how to do it. See all these little gold dots? This one right here. You push that, and the door opens. You want even more cool space-age technology? Well, check these things out right here. These aren't just for show. This was part of a system that allowed for emergency automatic braking. Imagine that, the same kind of technology that we have in our cars today that can prevent an accident. Jim Street was predicting it back in 1958. This has some kind of radar-y kind of system that would actually allow the car to stop if you thought you were going to hit something. Yeah, that is indeed the future that we live today. The cool automotive technology didn't stop with the way the car looked or those amazing tires. It was actually built all through the cars. And we'll start with the way you control this car. I mean, yeah, it's got this cool futuristic steering wheel, but guess what? You didn't even have to use that steering wheel because you had this thing right here. It's called a unicontrol. The unicontrol was a device where you could actually pull to the right or pull to the left and control the steering for the car. Back then, the steering wheel would actually move and change. And if you wanted to accelerate, you push it like this. If you want to decelerate, use the brakes, you push it like that. And in fact, when you look on the floor, there's only one pedal. This unicontrol is actually how you were going to control the car. And this wasn't just a show car. This car actually worked. Now, don't get me wrong. Was it a car that was going to go into production? Absolutely not. But the idea of having the unicontrol made it actually work. And it goes even further. Look at these little things up here on the dashboard. These two little devices. You could actually control and steer the car with these using your fingers. Think about that. It's like the controls we have today. And what's also interesting, not only do they have it over here, but they had it over here on the passenger side as well. And then, of course, look, we've got a television set right here. Oh, check this out. And I got to remember, this is 1958. The idea of having, well, a record player in your car, that would be amazing. But this was the next generation of technology. This had audio tape. I like the fact that we've even got, I think this is Tom Jones. We've got other things down here. You could actually buy this kind of thing, but putting it in the car, having it mounted in the car, was absolutely amazing. It's got all these jet-age knobs and style. Everything is absolutely cool about the inside of this. And once again, it's all looking into the future of what the future of the automobile could be. And just to add another layer of something really interesting, not only could you control the car with the unicontrol or the steering wheels, that one pedal down there, it was actually remote controlled as well. In fact, there's a great scene on the TV show I've Got a Secret where Jim Street was using his remote control to drive the car into the center of the set while they were talking about it. Think about that, a car you could control by remote control. Now, it's not an autonomous car like we're having today, but it's the beginning of what could happen with technology and being able to control a car not with your own hands or with something completely different. Having this Golden Sahara II with this amazing space-age look and all this amazing technology inside was truly predicting the future of where cars were going to go. By the way, one futuristic thing that they imagined but did not have the technology to actually make work back in the late 50s was a telephone in the car. Yeah, that's something that'll never happen. The good news is Goodyear was willing to get on board when the Claremont Collection decided to refurbish and renew this Golden Sahara II. They came up with a new form of glow-in-the-dark tires. Now, the only downside of these tires is they're solid rubber, meaning if you were to try to drive this on the road, yeah, it'd be a pretty bumpy ride. I can't pop the trunk the entire way right now, but inside the back, you can see why it needs to be a huge trunk space. That's because you needed the room to handle all of the technology that goes into the back, some of which still looks like it came out of the 1950s. Others, though, a little more modern, although that, you can see, still has tubes inside. It's pretty cool to look at all the technology they put into this car to make all that futuristic stuff work. And the back seat had its own cool design with these wraparound seats, no seat belts needed, of course. And check this out. How about a bar in the back? That's right. This was designed in. You got your ice bucket, you got your place for your glasses, your bottles, everything you want. Because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, having a wet bar in a car while you're driving. When George Barris came up with the Golden Sahara I, one of the things he also did was make his own pearlescent paint. And believe it or not, he actually used fish scales to make that paint. Not surprisingly, he said the paint stunk. Now, these days, we're very used to the concept of pearlescent paint, but back in the late 50s or mid-50s, that was a pretty creative concept. Now, when Speakeasy Customs out of Chicago redid this car, not only did they use the pearlescent paint, but they put 3 coats of clear over it. Then they wet sanded it, first with 2,000 grit, then 3,000 grit, then they put another layer of clear on top of that to make sure that this car had not just the pearlescent paint, but had exactly the right kind of sheen, the right kind of shimmer that you're going to want from a custom show car. The good news is the future of the Golden Sahara II is almost as bright as those tires right there. That's because, thanks to the Claremont Collection, it's been restored to its former glory and is now touring the country, showing people what the future looked like back in 1958, a very interesting chapter in the automotive evolution.